What is every Premier League team's heaviest defeat of the last century? Today, guys, we are looking at some of the negative sides of football as we look at all 20 teams in the Premier League season of 23-24, and we're looking at their heaviest defeat of the last 100 years. Now, before we get into the results themselves, let me just lay down a few rules of today's video. As I say, it is of the last 100 years, so no results before 1923 will be included in today's video. There are some absolutely bonkers results from the 1800s, but they won't be included because they are not from the most recent 100 years. As I say as well, guys, it is the heaviest defeat to the goal difference. So therefore, a 6-0 defeat is obviously worse than a 7-2 defeat, even though in the 7-2 defeat, you'll have conceded more goals. For those teams that have been beaten a couple times by the same heavy scoreline in the last 100 years, we're going to be looking at the most recent one. And I'll also specify that no friendlies will be included because you get some absolutely ridiculous scores in friendlies when teams don't take it seriously. It's only from league and cup games. Before we get into today's video, guys, please do make sure to hit that like button, even if you don't like to hear about your team's worst defeat in the most recent 100 years. Let's go for 300 likes on this video, and that would be a massive help to the channel. Please do make sure to subscribe if you haven't already to help the channel push towards 40,000 subscribers. And let's go through the teams from the least worst defeats to the worst defeats. Kicking it off with Wolves. Now, for Wolverhampton Wanderers, you only have to go back to last season when they suffered a 6-0 defeat away at Brighton and Hove Albion. Now, Wolves have actually suffered a few 6-0 defeats over the recent 100 years, of course, but we are looking at the most recent one, like I say, and it was last season against Brighton. Brighton had an absolutely fantastic season in 2022-2023, but this result still came as a massive shock, even though Wolves were in the bottom half. Coming into this game, Wolves looked pretty certain of staying up. They'd won 3 of their last 4 games, but to lose 6-0 at Brighton is still so bad. The Wolves fans must have been fuming. Sticking with 6-0s, and it's Sheffield United with their 6-0 away defeat at Arsenal in the League Cup in 2008. Now, this one's not so bad actually, because Sheffield United at the time were a championship team, and when you're going away to Arsenal, who were a top 4 team in the Premier League at the time, you're not expecting much, are you? Yes, 6-0 is a terrible defeat, and the Sheffield United fans were left with nothing to cheer in the 3rd round of this competition, but it's not the worst one on here, so Sheffield United fans, you can be quite happy with this. Now, what might cheer the Sheffield United fans up a little bit is Arsenal's worst defeat over the recent 100 years is actually worse than Sheffield United's. They lost 7-0 away to West Ham United in the old Division 1 in 1927. Now, this is by record Arsenal's worst defeat over the last 100 years because it was by 7 goals, but there's some honourable mentions in the Premier League. 8-2 away at Manchester United, 6-0 away at Chelsea. But for now, Arsenal's worst defeat in 100 years is this defeat from 96 years ago away to West Ham. Imagine going away to West Ham as an Arsenal fan and losing 7-0. Goodness me. Sticking with the 7-0s, it's the same story for Chelsea as they went away to Nottingham Forest in 1991 in Division 1 and lost 7-0 as well. Now, this is when the footballing landscape was obviously very different to where it is now. Chelsea at the time, they finished 11th in this season. Nottingham Forest finished 8th. And what a team Nottingham Forest had as well. Managed by Brian Clough, Nigel Clough, Roy Keane and Stuart Pearce all got on the score sheet in this game as Chelsea went home 7-0 losers. It's another 7-0 defeat for another London team here as Brentford lost 7-0 at Peterborough in League 2 in 2007. It just goes to show how far Brentford have come since then. 16 years ago, they were losing 7-0 at Peterborough in League 2 in a season where they finished 14th in the table, and now Brentford are in the top half of the Premier League. It's an incredible story, but there were some dark days at Brentford, and this is one of them. Another 7-0 here, and it's West Ham United as they lost 7-0 at Sheffield Wednesday in the old Division 1 in 1959. This defeat is now 64 years old, and West Ham haven't suffered a defeat by 7 goals in a League or Cup since this game. This was a poor season for West Ham, where they lost 14 of their 21 away games in the 59-60 season. They did somehow still stay up though. For Luton Town, you only have to wind the clock back 1 year as they lost 7-0 to Fulham in the Championship in 2022. Now, this was the season where Fulham absolutely smashed the Championship to pieces. They also beat Reading and Blackburn by 7 goals as well. They were absolute monsters. But for them to beat Luton Town 7-0 really did come as a bit of a surprise. At the time, Fulham, yes, they were top of the Championship, but Luton Town were in the playoffs and they needed a result with 1 game to go after this to secure their Championship playoff place. They went on to lose 7-0 at Craven Cottage in a truly embarrassing performance. They did, however, wrap up the playoffs on the final day, and 1 year later, they're now promoted and will be playing Fulham again in the Premier League. Next up, it's Everton and it's a 7-0 defeat at Highbury as they lost to Arsenal in 2005. Now, this is when Everton were actually a really solid Premier League outfit. They actually finished 4th in this season. But what they were doing on this occasion, I have no idea. They lost 7-0. Their fans must have been seething. Next up, it's Manchester United, and you only have to wind the clock back a few months from the time of recording this video. Manchester United lost 7-0, and the worst part of it was to their rivals Liverpool. Now, at the time, Manchester United were actually above Liverpool in the table. Liverpool, despite having a weird season, did manage to demolish Manchester United and Bournemouth, which we'll come on to in a little bit. As for Manchester United, a truly embarrassing performance. I feel like it is worth mentioning their 4-0 defeat at MK Dons a few years ago, as that is a truly embarrassing performance, but this is their heaviest of the most recent 100 years. For Newcastle United, it's an 8-1 defeat at the hands to West Ham United in 1986. Now, this is when in Division 1, which is now the Premier League, West Ham were really good. They were chasing down the title at this time. Alvin Martin scored a hat-trick for the Hammers, and pretty much everyone could have scored on this day. Newcastle United went on to concede 72 goals in this season, 8 of them being in this game. They did, however, still manage to finish in 11th. For Tottenham Hotspur, it's an 8-0 defeat to FC Köln in the UEFA Intertoto Cup in 1995. Tottenham Hotspur went on to lose 3 of their 4 games in the group stage and didn't get through their group, and they've had some terrible results to German teams. I remember the 7-2 defeat to Bayern Munich as well. Dreadful. For Aston Villa, we only have to wind the clock back 11 years as they lost 8-0 to Chelsea in the Premier League in 2012. Aston Villa had an absolutely terrible Christmas in 2012. They lost 8-0 to Chelsea. They went on to lose 4-0 at home to Tottenham and 3-0 at home to Wigan. That's got to be the worst Christmas I've ever heard of. Next up, it's Manchester City, and we've grown used to seeing them absolutely destroying teams, but they have been destroyed themselves, although we do have to wind the clock back 90 years as they lost 8-0 to Wolves in Old Division 1 in the 1933-34 season. This is a time when football results were absolutely ridiculous. Manchester City also lost 7-2 at home to West Bromwich Albion the same season. They did not like playing the Black Country teams. However, Manchester City still went on to finish 5th in the same season. Sticking in the 1930s, it's a 9-1 defeat for Nottingham Forest at the hands of Blackburn Rovers in Division 2. Nottingham Forest lost 15 of their 21 away games in Division 2 that season. It reminds me a little bit of the Premier League last year when Forest were really good at home but dreadful away from home. In that season, Forest home form did keep them up as they survived the drop by 4 points. Next up, it's Liverpool and a 9-1 defeat to Birmingham City, also in Division 2, which is now the Championship. This is back in 1954. Can you imagine being a Liverpool fan, going away to Birmingham City and watching your team concede 9 goals? It just goes to show how much the footballing landscape has changed. Birmingham City won the league in this season. Liverpool finished in 11th. For Brighton, it's a 9-0 away defeat at Middlesbrough, also in Division 2 in 1958. This would have been a ridiculous game to go to. Brian Clough helped himself to 5 goals on this day at Ayresome Park. What is weird is Brighton still went on to finish ahead of Middlesbrough in the same season. For AFC Bournemouth, we're only going back to last season as they lost 9-0 at Liverpool in 2022. Once again, just imagine what it must have been like as a Bournemouth fan going up to Anfield and watching this unfold in front of your eyes. Yes, Liverpool would have been strong favourites, but 9-0 is ridiculous. Bournemouth had just come up to the Premier League, but they did go on to get revenge against Liverpool when they beat them 1-0 at the Vitality, and they did still stay up this season. Incredible. AFC Bournemouth fans can take some comfort by the fact that they're not the first team to go and lose 9-0 at Anfield, as Crystal Palace went there in Division 1 in 1989 and also saw a 9-0 defeat. This is the last time Liverpool went on to win Division 1, which is now the Premier League, up until 30 years later. Liverpool had 8 different goal scorers on this day. Crystal Palace were ripped to shreds, but they did also just stay up this season, finishing in 15th place. Next up, it's Fulham, and oh look, it's Liverpool again, this time 10-0. To be fair to Fulham, when they went away to Anfield in 1986 in the second round of the League Cup, they were a 3rd tier side, and Liverpool took no chances and showed no mercy as they absolutely ripped them to shreds. Liverpool were unbelievably strong in the 80s, and they went on to get into the final of this competition that same season. Finally, it's Burnley, and it's another 10-0 defeat as they lost 10-0 to Sheffield United in Division 1 in 1929. In this same season, Burnley did lose 8-0 to Liverpool, they lost 7-0 to Cardiff, and they lost 7-1 to Huddersfield. It wasn't all bad for Burnley on the road that season, as they did win 7-2 at Newcastle and 6-3 at Birmingham City. Can you imagine being a Burnley fan that season? Burnley are now back in the Premier League, but it just goes to show how different football was in the 1920s, nearly 100 years ago. So then guys, that wraps up today's video. Let me know your thoughts on some of those absolutely bonkers results. As I say, we were doing it based on the heaviest result, not the most embarrassing. Even if your team lost 3-0 to a non-league side in the FA Cup, Cup that didn't make the cut in this video because we're looking at the heaviest defeat. Like I say, guys, if you've enjoyed this video, please do make sure to hit the like button, and if you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button down below. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.